Taking a look here at the live chat, T-minus 46 minutes, 28 seconds and counting. Want to thank our wonderful moderators for helping to keep things kosher in the live chat. So thanks to Astro Jen, Astro Joe, Stephanie B, Rusty Shackelford. Really appreciate the four of you for helping us out with the broadcast. Very much appreciated. Also, thanks to Astro Joe in particular for gifting a Spaceflight Now membership. Thank you so much, Astro Joe, for that. Also to one of our other channel members, Callisti Lee, for gifting 10 Spaceflight Now memberships. Really appreciate that. And Astro Jen, also gifting a Spaceflight Now membership. So if you are one of our newest channel members, be sure to thank the three of them in the live chat if you haven't already. And our thanks also extend to Robert C. for a $10 super chat. Thank you, Robert. Who says, once again, thanks for all the great coverage. Beautiful weather here in Brevard. Can't wait to see another great launch. Been here 40 years and they never get old. God bless Elon and the engineers. I'm envious of the number of launches you've seen having lived here for 40 years. I unfortunately miss getting to cover the space shuttle era, but it's certainly great being a part of space flight coverage community now. Thanks also to channel member Bob Witter for a $10 super chat. Thank you so much, Bob. Says your coverage is always great. Thank you. Waiting for a great view from Ocala. Well, it certainly looks like the clouds will cooperate for views from just about all of Central Florida tonight, so hopefully Ocala is among those. T-minus 44 minutes, 41 seconds and counting. Taking a look at the trajectory for today's mission. Falcon 9 rocket's going to be lifting off, of course, from Pad 39A here at NASA's Kennedy Space Center. This is a somewhat northeasterly trajectory, though not quite as aggressively northeast as, say, a mission heading up to the International Space Station. But similar to an ISS mission, we will see that booster make its way back to landing zone 1 after liftoff. So if you are in the Central Florida area, especially here in Brevard County, don't be surprised if you hear a sonic boom as the booster makes its way back down for touchdown at landing zone 1, LZ1, over at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. A little bit after 7 minutes into the flight. Because of the payloads that are on board of the Bandwagon 1 mission, SpaceX is going to be cutting its feed right after the point of first stage landing. So as far as what we're getting from SpaceX, it'll be a bit of a truncated broadcast today. Well, SpaceX hasn't said explicitly why. I think a logical conclusion of that would be the fact that this is supporting part of KoreaSat's Project 425 satellite constellation. These are synthetic aperture radar satellites, or SAR satellites, for their government. And the last time SpaceX launched with a batch of, or a couple of Project 425 satellites, they did the same thing where didn't get full views of deployment. So unfortunately also that means we don't have a good timeline for the deployment of the other 10 payloads, but hopefully we'll get confirmation from SpaceX via social media as deployment occurs. So be sure to check our social media for updates on that as deployment goes along. We're now T-minus 41 minutes, 13 seconds and counting to the launch of this Falcon 9 rocket. Just a few minutes from now is when the launch director will give their go-ahead for the start of prop load. In the meantime, want to thank the more than 4,500 of you that are joining us with our live coverage this afternoon. We'd love it if you could help us out by hitting the like button. Allow more folks to find their way in as we are cruising into the final 40 here. Also, thank you to Thrash Life for a $10 super chat. Thank you so much, Thrash. Who says, always love the great commentary. Just joking when I say we all know what MaxQ means. Cheers watching from Denver. Always good to have our friends from Colorado joining us, and hopefully those in Colorado who are getting ready for Space Symposium coverage there on the ground will also have a fruitful and productive week as well. We're now T-minus 38 minutes, 43 seconds and counting. About a minute away from the point at which they'll take the poll on the start of prop load here. As part of its efforts toward maximum reusability, SpaceX, of course, will attempt to recover the payload fairings following fairing separation on this flight. They splash down under parachutes into the Atlantic Ocean waters on this mission. And recovery vessel Doug pulling double duty after picking up the fairing halves from the recently flown Starlink 6-47 mission, which launched off of Pad 40. It's been heading up north to get in position to launch or to recover the payload fairings from this mission as well. So we'll see a very full Doug cruise back into Port Canaveral after it's done with this operation today. SpaceX saves about $6 million per recovery. This is what that operation looks like, hoisting them out of the water and onto the recovery vessel. This image taken from a recovery operation last year. And as we are just about a minute or so away from the start of propellant load, assuming that SpaceX is ready to do so, now's a good time as any to talk about the countdown timeline here. Of course, that process will currently T-minus 32 minutes, 39 seconds and counting. It's working through some technical snafus on the back end here. Hoping to bring you the countdown timeline in just a moment. Meanwhile, as far as the countdown process is going, SpaceX should be about 2.5 minutes or so into the fueling process. Hopefully we'll get an update from SpaceX that they are, in fact, in fueling. But as far as a visual, what we're looking for, if you look near the base of the Falcon 9 rocket where the strung back starts to taper, you can see a slightly lighter gray ring around the base of the Falcon 9 first stage booster. that's about where we start to see some frost form and some vapor. All right, and we have worked out the user error bug on the back end, so we'll go ahead and step through the countdown timeline here. As mentioned, the go ahead for the start of prop load is given at T-minus 38 minutes or thereabouts. Propellant load began at T-minus 35 minutes with the aforementioned RP-1 or rocket grade kerosene being loaded on board the first and second stages of the Falcon 9 rocket. At the same time, that LOX began flowing on board the first stage. T-minus 16 minutes, second stage LOX load begins, but before that happens, we'll see the so-called big vent from the strong back as the feed lines are chilled at the pad. T-minus 7 minutes, the chill down of the 9 Merlin 1D engines gets underway. It involves flowing a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and turbo pumps and helps protect the engines from the risk of thermal shock and damage during the startup sequence. About 6 minutes out, the first stage kerosene tank should be full. Then at T-minus 4.5 minutes, we'll see the strong back retract begin from the Falcon 9 rocket. The strong back, or the transporter erector, will recline about 1.5 degrees away from the vehicle. It stays in that position until liftoff. At that point, the strong back will pull back in a much more rapid fashion to clear the way for the vertical climb of the Falcon 9. About 2 minutes out, liquid oxygen load should be complete. At that point, the Falcon 9 is fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. In the final 60 seconds, control of the countdown is handed over from the ground sequencer to the Falcon 9's onboard flight computers. The propellant tanks are brought up to flight pressure. 45 seconds out, the SpaceX launch director will give their go for liftoff. The engine ignition command is issued at T-minus 3 seconds. And if all 9 Merlin 1D engines ignite and are healthy, the flight computer will give the command for the hold down clamps to release the bird for a T0 liftoff, again targeting 7:16 p.m. Eastern, 23:16 UTC. And with fueling underway, SpaceX is committing to that T0 liftoff at 7:16 tonight. We're getting some punched-in views from our friend Pete Carstens with Max-Q Productions, and you can see much more clearly in this shot the vapor forming around the Falcon 9 first stage booster. Thank you, Pete, for this view. Happens as the super cold densified liquid oxygen is loaded on board the Falcon 9 first stage, and it's much colder temperatures meet the comparatively much warmer Florida air. As we're now about T-minus 25 minutes, just a little bit before there. Again, at this point, they're loading cryogenic helium, or will start loading cryogenic helium momentarily onto the storage tanks on board the Falcon 9's second stage. There, of course, you're seeing the payload fairings at the top of the rocket, which are encasing and protecting the 11 spacecraft on board this Bandwagon 1 mission. Just as a rundown of the payloads here, we have Korea's 425 sat, part of its Project 425 synthetic aperture radar constellation. Got 6 satellites from Hawkeye 360, clusters 8 and 9. Each cluster contains 3 satellites apiece. Tyvek International's Centauri 6 satellite, a Japanese company, IQPS, and its QPS SAR-7 or Tsukuyomi 2 satellite. Got another SAR satellite on here from Capella Space, which is Capella 14. and a company based in India, Tata Advanced System Limited's TSAT 1A satellite. Again, likely due to the sensitivity of the 425 sat, SpaceX is going to be cutting its camera feeds of this mission after booster landing over at landing zone 1, so we will not be getting views of spacecraft deployment this afternoon. But we will bring you live views throughout this process for as long as we can see the Falcon 9 first and second stages. We will be tracking that. And again, as a reminder, if you were not here for me mentioning this earlier, the booster will return to land at landing zone 1. So if you are in the central Florida area, especially if you're along the Space Coast, you may very well hear a sonic boom as the Falcon 9 first stage comes back in through the atmosphere for a land landing. Worth noting as well, this will be the 40th landing over at LZ1, the 50th landing in Florida to date, and the 294th Falcon booster landing in total. We're now T-minus 22 minutes, 16 seconds and counting, just a couple minutes away from the start of the so-called big vent. Conditioning the feed lines ahead of second stage LOX load. We're now T-minus 20 minutes, 44 seconds and counting. As we close up on the big vent here, want to thank a few more folks for their support this evening in our live coverage. Want to thank channel member Christopher Jones for a $2 super chat. Thank you so much, Christopher. Good to see you this evening. John Donadio for a $10 super chat. Thank you so much, John. Danny Naranjo, apologies, Danny, if I mispronounced your last name, but thank you so much for a $2 super chat, and hello to you there in Denver. There are T-minus 19 minutes, 36 seconds and counting. We're about almost a minute past the point where we normally see the big vent from the strong back. Pete's guiding his camera toward the... Oh, there we go. All right, so... the big vent is underway as they are thermally conditioning the feed lines ahead of prop load here. You could tell which direction the wind is blowing today, coming practically straight toward us with this big vent. Get a close-up view from our friend Pete Carsons with Max Q Productions here. And with the addition of some updated information about the T0 here, we're just adjusting our countdown clock here. We're making this adjustment based off of the timing of the big vent here, which is still underway. Currently at T-minus 18 minutes, 13 seconds and counting. A couple minutes left on this before it wraps up. As we close in on the end of the big vent, want to thank a few more folks for their support this evening. Robert Snow, channel member, gifting 5 Spaceflight Now memberships. Thank you so much, Robert. Really appreciate that. Richard Cochran also gifting 5 Spaceflight Now memberships. I'm sensing a theme or a pattern here, as channel members Rick Donner and Nelson Reyes both gifting 5 Spaceflight Now memberships apiece. Thank you so much to both Rick and Nelson. And if you are one of our newest 20 channel members, first off, welcome aboard. Glad to have you with us. Be sure to thank either Robert, Richard, Rick, or Nelson in the live chat if you haven't already. Our thanks also to Charles McMahon for a $10 super chat, saying thanks for the terrific coverage as the big vent is wrapping up here at the pad. T-minus 14 minutes, 30 seconds and counting. I want to thank channel member Josh King for a $5 super chat and a good question here, asking why does SpaceX sometimes fly a smaller, he says, or shorter engine nozzle on the Falcon 9 second stage? Well, it has to do in part with cost savings and partly to do with performance. It's cheaper to manufacture a shorter engine nozzle as you're using less material, but you can also get better performance with a longer nozzle. So if SpaceX doesn't need the full performance of the longer nozzle, as we've seen them use on Starlink launches as recently as yesterday evening, and they can get away with a shorter nozzle, they will. I don't believe we've heard yet if they're going to be flying the short nozzle today or not, but I suspect they might. But we will wait and see just a little less than 14 minutes from now. Cappy Cross, channel member with a $5 super chat, saying Cap in Hudson, Florida, saying thanks as usual for all what you do. Thank you, Cappy. Thank you so much to Luis Culp for a $5 super chat. Ace Combat with a $2 super chat, asking for a little eclipse chat. I suppose we can talk a little eclipse, as NASA has provided a lovely graphic here on their countdown clock. Unfortunately, because we do have some other duties here at the Cape, a number of us are not going to be able to head to the path of totality. But if you are able to get into that path, which will sweep up in the United States from Texas through the northeastern states, highly, highly encourage you to do so. And just remember that the difference between totality at 100% or 99%, the para-umbra, I believe it's called, is, as one astrophysicist noted, 1,000 times less impressive. So if you have the opportunity to get to totality, you will experience a whole different sensation, sights, sounds than you will just outside of the path of totality. And there's a pretty good swath of the country that will be able to experience that. So if you have the chance to do so, don't miss out on this chance. The next big eclipse sweep across the country isn't going to come until 2044. So if you want to wait that long, you got another 20 years in you, feel free to do so. But now is a great opportunity if you have the time and the resources to make it out. We're now T-minus 11 minutes, 5 seconds and counting. Should be getting some views momentarily from SpaceX as well. And again, we'll be listening into them to let you know about any relevant callouts as far as the fueling process and any updates on this mission. Currently T-minus 8 minutes, 32 seconds and counting from the planned liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket. SpaceX is about a little over a minute away from the chill down of the 9 Merlin 1D engines here at the pad. SpaceX noting again that they are going to be ending their camera views at booster landing. T-minus 6 minutes, 40 seconds and counting. While we still have some time before liftoff, let's go ahead and step back in time and talk about the flight history of this first stage booster. It is going to be making its 14th flight today. This booster started with its first flight. It was a Starlink mission back on May 14th of 2022, sending up 53 version 1.5 Starlink satellites into orbit. That was followed up by a C-band communication satellite for SES, SES-22 on June 29th. Next up was a pair of Starlink missions. The first, Starlink 4-26 on August 10th, and 4-35 on September 24th. That was followed by this booster's first lunar supporting mission with the launch of the iSpace Hakuto R lunar lander on December 11th. Of course, the launch went off as planned, but unfortunately the lander crash landed on the moon. That was followed up on February 7th, 2023 with the Amazonas Nexus satellite, Spanish communication satellite for Hispasat, covers the Americas, Europe, and North Africa. It was followed by a flight to the International Space Station with the Commercial Resupply Services, or CRS-27 launch on March 15th. And then every mission thereafter were Starlink flights up until now, of course. Those were Group 6-2 on April 19th, Group 5-11 on June 12th, 6-12 on September 4th, 6-27 on November 8th, 6-37 on January 15th, and 6-41 on March 4th. Which of course brings us to today and the launch of Bandwagon 1. 11 different satellites on board. Strong back retract sequence getting underway here. So the clamp arms will be opening up, and the transporter erector, or the strong back, will recline away to green half away from the Falcon 9 rocket, stay in that position until liftoff. You see the clamp arms opening up. Here's some views from our friend Pete Carstens of the transporter rector tilted away from the Falcon 9 rocket. We're now just a little over 3 minutes away from the planned liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket. We're coming up on the conclusion of first stage liquid oxygen load just a few seconds from now. Apologies for the glitch here. We're now about 2.5 minutes away. Want to thank the more than 42,000 of you who are watching live with us this evening as we are looking forward to a great launch of the Falcon 9 rocket in just a little over 2 minutes from now. If you haven't already, be sure to hit the like button, allow some more folks to find their way in as we're coming up on the final 2 minutes of the count. And we will come back to our support here on the live chat on the other side of the mission. For now, though, as we're within the last couple minutes, we'll keep our focus here on the Falcon 9 rocket itself. And we do have confirmation that the Falcon 9 is now fully fueled with 1 million pounds of propellant. Now a minute and a half away from liftoff. That venting we were just seeing was the ground gas closeouts. One of the final steps before they're ready for flight. Coming up on the final minute for launch here. Now less than a minute away, just standing by for a call that we are go for launch from the launch director. Falcon 9 is in autonomous startup, now 30 seconds. And we have confirmation we are go for launch. 18 seconds remaining. And here we go. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Engine ignition and liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket. Nearly sunset as this Falcon 9 ascends from Historic Launch Complex 39A. Now 15 seconds into flight. Getting some great views from our tracking team here. Let's listen to the roar of those 9 Merlin 1D engines. Little over a minute into flight, we're hearing nominal power and telemetry. So far, a good flight of the Falcon 9 rocket. Rocket passing through max Q, the point of greatest aerodynamic pressure on the vehicle. Now, we're coming up on a few different events in rapid succession. We'll see first stage management cutoff for Miko about 2 minutes and 14 seconds into flight. That'll be followed a few seconds later by stage separation, second stage engine start, and then the beginning of the boost back burn, as again this booster is going to be making its way back down towards a landing at landing zone 1. Here's some on-view camera views from the Falcon 9 first stage. Some views from our tracker here on the ground. And our friend Pete Carsons with Max Q Productions. As you see Miko. Stage separation. We're seeing the great shot of that flip maneuver here and the start of that boost back burn. Just incredible views from the ground. A little over 3 minutes into flight now. We should see fairing deployment in about 10 seconds on the SpaceX feed. Some great views from Pete Carsons here. We did hear confirmation of fairing separation. No views of that today, again, because of the sensitivity of some of the payloads on board. That boost back burn has ended. Those bursts that you're seeing, though, are the cold gas thrusters as the booster's attitude is being adjusted. Here's some views of that process here from the SpaceX onboard cameras. You can see the hypersonic grid fins deploying now, helping to provide stability and steering as the booster is making its way back down from whence it came practically, making its arrival back on Florida's Space Coast, coming up for a landing at landing zone 1 in just about 3 minutes. About 4.5 minutes into flight. We're just about a minute away now from the start of the first stage entry burn beginning. So far, a nominal flight of the Falcon 9 first stage as well as the second stage. Some great views given the time of day and the sunlight, really helping to illuminate the Falcon 9 first stage booster. A little over 5 minutes into flight now, less than about 30 seconds away from the start of that first stage entry burn beginning. Taking a look briefly from the SpaceX onboard cameras, you can see some of the cloud cover that the Falcon 9 came through just a few minutes ago. And a view from inside the Falcon 9 first stage. Coming up on the start of the entry burn momentarily. We should be seeing the entry burn start There's the entry burn. Coming a little bit later in the timeline than what was previously advertised. No word from SpaceX that things are off nominal, though, right now. So it appears to have been a good entry burn. Now a little over 7 minutes into flight. According to the timeline, we should be coming up on first stage landings, so things happening just a little bit off from the advertised timeline. Now 7.5 minutes into flight, we should see the start of the landing burn shortly. Some great shots here, and there's the start of the landing burn. A little bit of a wider shot of that landing burn. Here's the same coming in from the SpaceX feed. And we just heard the sonic boom here at the press site. With the landing legs deployed, it looks like we've got a good touchdown of the Falcon 9 first stage. This was the 14th landing of tail number B1073. This was the 294th SpaceX booster landing to date. A beautiful liftoff and landing as the first stage booster stands tall at landing zone 1, a little over 9 minutes into flight. And again, because of the sensitivity of the payload, SpaceX is not going to be providing views of spacecraft deployment today. And with that, we're going to go ahead and come to our mission stats in just a moment. But before we do, of course, we want to thank the people who helped make this live launch coverage possible. We very much appreciate you being with us and helping support us this evening. So our thanks to SG for a $5 super chat. Thank you so much, SG. Good to see you this evening. Air Force Proud 95 with a $5 super chat as well. Air Force saying, love the channel. Please wish Michelle a happy half birthday. Michelle, a very happy half birthday to you. Jason Huey with a $10 super chat. Thank you, Jason. Jason says he is living in Hawaii now, asking if he will ever see a launch this way. Well, maybe not necessarily a launch, but you may see a splashdown, depending on what the visibility looks like. SpaceX may decide to return its flight path to mirror what they did with the Flight 1 and 2 missions of Starship. In that case, they were intending to have the ship upper stage splash down north of Hawaii in the Pacific Ocean. And so there's a possibility that if they use that trajectory again, that you may see a Starship streak across the sky, which could be quite impressive depending on the time of day and the visibility at that point. Our thanks also to Tave for a very generous $20 super chat. Thank you so much, Tave. Really appreciate your support at that level. Tave says, hello from Philly. The kids Logan and Eva are watching. Hello, Logan and Eva. So glad you could all be with us this evening. Hope you enjoyed the launch. And hope you get a chance to enjoy the eclipse tomorrow as well. Mark Powell, the $2 super chat. Thank you so much, Mark, for your support this evening. And Mark Powell, shortly thereafter, joining with channel membership at the Pad Leader level. Really appreciate that additional support, Mark, and welcome to our community here at Spaceflight Now. Support from a couple other channel members. Janine with a $2 super chat. Thank you, Janine. Same with Space Nerd with a $1 super chat. Thank you, Space Nerd. Mel Roberts Harold saying, not the usual message I leave here, but I do have to take the opportunity to make my eldest daughter blush as she is watching. Well, hello to Mel and to her daughter there. Won't overly embarrass you here on the stream. Callistia Lee with a $20 super chat. Thank you, Callistia. Says this never gets old. Thank you, Will, Mods, and all of Spaceflight Now for bringing us this amazing coverage. We appreciate all of you. Well, thank you, Callistia, for your ongoing support. One of our other channel members, I'm Lita with a $5 super chat. Good to see you this evening, Lita. Saying thanks again for providing us with great coverage. Love my Spaceflight Now family. Hello, Will. Hello, Lita. And last but not least, Jonathan Roger with a $5 super chat from Australia, saying Australia had its first rocket launch this year, or has its first rocket launch this year, asking if we're going to cover that. Well, I would love to say that we're going to hop a plane and head down to Australia for that mission. We will certainly look at the dates for when that launch is going to happen, and I believe it is an orbital launch attempt, which is mostly what we cover here on Spaceflight Now and certainly on the channel. So